Onward with groups.
Hello, everyone. It's my great honor and pleasure to present the work on groups at CES. So, a couple of quick disclaimers. If I accidentally say I did some work, I'm obviously wrong. My students did the work. And if I say we, it's basically most probably many of you sitting in audience. Okay, so let us talk about groups. In CS, just like at the level of individuals, we study forms, functions, and patterns and evolution of group living. And we sort of I have sort of categorized these group living studies in CES that has been done over the years broadly as three. One looking at eusocial insects on the top right there, then conspecific groups that consist of only a single species, and then groups that consist of multiple species. So let's see what CES has done over the years. So let me start with a quick note. It's really hard to summarize the work of Raghavendra Kadaka's lab over an entire life and over several decades. And he has been in love with this paper wasp, Rhopalidia marginata, where unlike other eusocials insects, all adults are equal, and who becomes the queen is the biggest and fundamental question that anybody should be interested in understanding. So, who becomes the queen was really something that Raghavendra Gadakar lab chased on. And not only that anybody can become a queen, it seems like they have a really nice succession of queens, which the wasps seem to know, and it was really hard for us to know, us as in researchers, right? And finally, Gadaka's lab cracked the code, and it looks like, if you measure any one of their hundreds of social behaviors, it's really hard to tell who the queen can be. If you naively guess, would the most aggressive one be the queen? No. If you naively guess the one who feeds most would be the queen? No. What you have to account for is a multi-layered network approach which accounts for all of these behaviors. And if I'm right, it was probably the last PhD student by which the secret of who becomes the queen was cracked. It's based on the social network analysis of many of these colonies, where versatility of individuals, which sort of measures how each individual influences multiple social behavior, predominantly these three: aggression, feeding behavior, and how they use the space. It's this combination that best predicts who the next queen would be. Okay, so moving on to another social insect, we find this beautiful, civil engineering architectural marvels on our campus, right? Professor Reddy Borges' lab has studied these social behaviors among many other things that she has studied, and one of the things that would fascinate any one of us is how do these really tiny insects build these massive structures? It's like humans with our hands and some mud building something like Empire State Building or the biggest, whatever the tallest building as of today is, right? How do they really do this? What are the sort of underlying mechanisms? How do they sort of pick the materials? What kind of materials they pick? How do they build strength to this? Right? They did some really cool experiments, cute experiments, if I could say, where these wasps or termites were presented with variety of objects, from natural objects as well as synthetic objects, all the way from tissue papers to actual red soil that they use. And as long as they are chewy and these termites could walk on them, they were actually quite happy, and they seem to have a preference for granular materials. And when they build these stuff, and it turns out that soil moisture is a really predominant factor that determines how what the strength of these mounts are going to be. There's an optimum amount of soil moisture that actually made the ease of handling as well as building this as well as giving strength. Moving on to non-eusocial species, what defines these other class of species which form groups is that the individuals are highly unrelated to one another. In the previous two examples that I gave, individuals are really brothers, sisters, cousins, very closely knit families, right? So they have a really good reason to help each other, to cooperate with one another. But if you think of these black buck herds, they constantly merge with other groups. They don't stay together as a family. So the selfishness tendencies, competition must begin to sort of dominate in all these species that are group living. How do they? Why do they do this? So anti-predatory benefits are often the predominant and driving factors. And Kavita Ishwaran's lab showed these very classic results from one of the very first in the field, showing that larger the group size, further the distance they can detect the threat from, right? And not only that, larger the group size, the lesser amount of time you have to spend being vigilant. So this sort of very clearly shows why it really helps to be in groups. Although there would be now more competition for resources, you actually benefit a lot by spending less time being vigilant and being able to detect predators from really far off, right? And then, you can now bring in some modern technology like drones, and you can fly drones over these things, and we can actually begin to understand how do these groups respond when threats such as students. Actually this entire sequence was a consequence of a student slowly walking towards the herd. Of course, when I look at the video, it looks beautiful. I wouldn't know what to do with it. But the students, when they look at the videos, somehow magically, this black bug, I'm sorry for the very poor quality of the video here, the black bug actually display a box around them. Can you all see them? Not only do they have a box, if I, give me a moment, I'll actually show you a very high resolution video of this. Not only do they actually display a box in front of students, they also have numbers over them. And they carry these numbers along with them. And now this makes it easy to understand who was the first individual who detected the threat and what did they do and what did other individuals do when they moved away, right? Okay. So thanks to students, again, I would black book would never behave with me. You can also do age and sex identification, again thanks to students. Okay, so now with these sort of very fine scale measurements which are happening really over less than a second, these cameras can capture what's happening in 1/20th of a second, right? So we can actually know how close they are coming, how nicely synchronized they when they are moving. What we find is sort of evidence for some of the classic theories in group living, that you must always come first so that you reduce the danger space around you, and then you move away from the threat. And also we can make some very interesting inferences about who was the leader. Was it the one who was at the back, or somebody at the front? Who do these individuals follow under these kind of instances? Not only black buck show herding behavior, they have a really, really fascinating behavior called. So, by the way, most of the herds are female herds with some males. For example, in this video, you could see that most of them have sort of light patches. They're all females. Just a couple of ones with the dark coat on the back, they are the males, right? What do males do in these species? So males actually aggregate in just about 2 times in a year. And why do they aggregate? For a very different reasons. In the previous cases, we saw that they were herding to actually escape from predators. Here, the males are herding to actually attract mates. So these are called licking grounds, and these licking grounds are basically historical, traditional grounds where black buck would come, stay there, and they now want the females to come and pick them for mating. And females are, of course, really, really choosy. So the way males and females move, and the decisions that females make, and the propensity for high local density of animals, these are the 3 factors that Kavita's lab showed that are really influential in driving these licking behaviors. By the way, black buck are spread all over India, but the licking is found only in a couple of places in India. Only 2 populations, one in Velavadar in Gujarat, the second one in Talchapar in Rajasthan. Only these 2 populations show licking. No other populations of black buck show licking behavior. This is the sort of graph that shows that as the female group size increases, the territoriality of the cluster, the number of individuals in these legs actually increase, and the propensity for males to form these legs increase. And again, you can now begin to take an aerial view of this, right? And you can begin to sort of not only see with binoculars how the females were moving, you can now begin to understand what are the interactions between males and females, females and females, and males and males. How are males fighting with each other to maintain their territories, and how are females competing with one another for the best mate, and how do males try to attract females. There are lots of very interesting interactions that happen over the legs. We are beginning to actually measure these using drone based imagery. And while doing this, we found something very, very interesting. So I mentioned to you that these black bugs have this, not only black bug, the legs by definition often have a traditional mating ground, where in the right season all the males come and aggregate. And this is a sort of from a book in 1981, where the year I was born, by the way. Okay, where you see that this is a map of the section of the Velavadar where in Gujarat where the leg is found. Okay, and you can see a couple of males in the leg. And now fast forward to 2030, if you now look at satellite images, so these black buck actually make these dung piles, which are actually detectable from satellite images. For example, you can just go to Google Earth, Google Maps, Google Earth Engine. You would be able to identify this, a couple of meters of radius of this, dung piles, and then you can actually mark them using in the same way that they did manually 50 years ago. And in fact, it was in the same place over the last 30 to 40 years. Switch over to 2024, there's actually nobody now. In fact, 2025, this year when I went to the Blackbuck Velavada National Park, everybody had moved to an alternative location here. So the sort of the idea that leks have a traditional mating ground, uh, uh, and it is stable over a really large period of time. But despite that, they suddenly have switched over to an entirely new lekking site. Is extremely fascinating. We don't fully understand why this happens. This is an ongoing research. Actually, what we then did was we looked at satellite images over the last 10 years. Every year, you can see that some new leg begins to form in October 2014. You can see more individuals, and by now, basically everybody has to switch to a new lecking site, sort of breaking the traditional ground and making a new ground for lecking. And if you were to plot, this is how it looks like. And what we have now done is actually both of our labs, Kavita's and our lab together. What we have done is we are trying to come up with some simple explanations why this could be true. What we show is that the tendency for black buck to be social, the males have to aggregate together in a place, right? So it seems that some males seems to have randomly preferred an alternative site for lecking, and but they don't always get attraction, so they go back. But when sufficient number of them have chosen the alternative site, there is some sort of a social positive feedback that sort of amplifies this behavior, and then everybody has switched over to the other side. And this is a mathematical model that can actually reproduce this behavior. And you don't have to even incorporate, sort of, assume that certain environmental drivers have driven. In fact, we find that if you look at both the areas, their various vegetation indices have all remained same. Okay, so a simple model where's randomness of the individual behavioral preferences together with the social and amplification can actually explain these kind of patterns. Coming to fish, again, see, when my students take fish videos, they come with beautiful arrows on their heads. Because they have arrows, we know the direction that they are moving. And when they know the direction of moving, we know how synchronized they are. For example, all of you are now really highly synchronized because you're all looking towards the board, right? But you're all not moving, but these fish are always moving, but they maintain synchrony. How do they do it? So there have been theories in the past saying that in the physics literature, saying that all that you have to do is copy your neighbors. Pick a few neighbors, copy them, and then keep moving. And if you do that, all of you will become aligned. So what the mathematical modeling in our lab, actually this was the work of Jitesh, who is also in the audience today here. What the fish seems to be doing are actually even simpler than what the models were saying. In fact, you have to pick one random neighbor, not too many random neighbors. You don't have to pick too many, just one random neighbor could explain all the patterns that we were observing. Basically, we often think that mathematical models are too simple, but this was a very interesting case where even the simplest model in the market was a bit more complex than necessary. Okay, so coming to now heterospecific groups, where we have many species that form groups. CES has really made some fundamental contributions in understanding why do these kind of groups happen, why do they form. So at the core is when individuals are finding a social partner, should that be a conspecific or should that be a heterospecific? Do you want to pick somebody like yours or do you want to pick somebody entirely opposite? So there are advantages to both. For example, in the context of licking, I want to attract mates. What's the point of licking with a Neil guy, right? I would better lick with another male of same species, like backbird, right? So likewise, cooperative breeding. On the other extreme, pollination, for example, frugivorous dispersal, they all have to happen by an entirely different species. Of course, the sort of fundamental contribution from CES here, from Karthik Shankar Lab, is to sort of think of this as a continuum. Don't think of them as two discrete entities, but there is basically a dissimilarity between individuals, that is more important than the species identity itself. Species boundary might lie somewhere, but dissimilarity of the social partner is what is important. And there are basically two types of benefits that one can accrue. Supplementary benefits. For example, if I want to just reduce my chance of being eaten, okay, I could be with my own type or other type. It doesn't really matter because the dilution of the predation risk is more important. But if I want something sort of complementary benefit, it often is beneficial to be with the heterospecifics. Right? So, and going beyond the conceptual framework that the CES has proposed, CES has also done a lot of work in the field looking at how do these flocks really look like in the field, right? Both in the context of birds as well as fish, marine fish. Karthik Shankar Lab has shown that phenotypic similarity is a real, as well as taxonomic similarity is a really important factor when these mixed species birds are formed. This was a global analysis based on various data sets from across the world. And in Kavita Shankar's lab, they find a theme that is consistent with these principles. That when butterflies form mixed aggregations, again they sort of tend to flock with their own type, and their own type as in terms of both coloration as well as even size. Size seems to be a really important factor. And then when you look at the interaction between these heterospecific flocks consisting of different species, there could be positive associations, there could be negative associations. And these two together often form these heterospecific flocks. And how are they really assembled? What are the mechanistic processes that assemble them? And again, there is now a lot of evidence coming from Karthik Shankar labs that phenotypical clumping is really important, and especially in small flocks. Basically, if you observe a small flock and a large flock, small flocks are likely to have much more phenotypic similarity than large flocks. And very incidentally, a mathematical modeling done in our lab by an undergrad showed something very similar. I know this is probably incredibly hard to interpret, so take my word that this seems to suggest that small groups are more deterministic than large groups, in the sense that small groups tend to be more phenotypically similar than the larger groups, and that seems to be consistent with various field data that has come out of CES. And finally, how are these networks at the level of individuals? So far, I have been speaking and talking about how are these networks in terms of at the species level, right? And recently, Umesh Shankaran's lab has done really nice work. Again, a lot of undergrads seem to play, or Umesh Shankar, Umesh Srinivas. Thanks. You giggled and I figured out. Okay. So they have done some really beautiful studies in the northeastern India where there are these mixed species flocks consisting of three species, and they find that the spatial overlap. So basically, these are two areas of the same species. I think this is the nuclear species, and this is in the central overlapping area where the other two partner species are found. But the space use actually determines the inter-individual connectedness in the flocks. Okay, and finally, we are now we are inspired by all my colleagues doing a lot of field work. What else can I do? I can do some experiments and do some modeling. Why not, right? So what we have begun to do now are experiments with mixed species. If the videos work, they don't. Okay, they didn't work. We will see that there are actually two individuals here, but they are of different species. There are four individuals here, they're actually of different species. There are 16 individuals of different species, eight individuals of two different fish species. You can see that they are sort of beautifully, sort of flocking together, schooling together. And we find something very, very interesting. I'll show you just one graph. In this example, there are these rosy bobs, which seem to have a preferred speed. Some preferred speed, doesn't matter what the number is. There's other species called tiger bobs. They have two preferred speeds. One is a fast swimming speed, other is a slow swimming speed. Okay. Whereas these guys have only a fast swimming speed. They always move fast. But what happens if we mix them together? We find something very surprising. When you mix them together, these guys just drop their slow swimming speed altogether. So basically, they sort of dramatically alter the way they speed. They sort of move to sort of make cohesive and polarized school, which sort of provides, in my opinion, a quantitative test of a principle called activity matching. Activity matching, in addition to phenotypic matching, is a really important sort of hypothesis and prediction of the mixed species framework developed by Karthik Shankar and others, saying that if you don't match, your activity would eventually sort of disperse and move away, right? Okay, so that brings to sort of end of my talk, where hopefully I have given some brief snapshots and summaries of what all CES folks have been up to, understanding groups. Thank you.
Questions. There are questions. Come back.
I have a question.
Vishu.
It's really interesting work. So about the result where you see that they just have to look at one other individual. I remember an old paper in which they're looking at bird formations, and in that case, if they were just following the algorithm of just looking at one other bird, then the errors, increase exponentially down each arm. So this is how jungle could this?
So that's a great question. So we have now done more experiments with many different species. So it seems like there are three classes of this schooling behavior, and what the one that I presented here is only one of them. Okay, so there is also another class which sort of matches with the classic theories. Okay, and there's a new class which I don't think there is any sort of theoretical framework to explain that yet. So yeah, you're right. It would be naive to expect that all species do the same thing, but it's also interesting that in the 12 species we studied, there are not 12 different things, but are only all of them can be boxed into only three sort of broad categories.
Your question.
Hello. In the heterospecific blocks, can we track that species are getting endangered due to lack of interaction between two species? Can we trace that?
Can I pass this question to the heterospecific man?
Can I pass it to Umesh Srinivasan? Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, I was asking in the heterospecific blocks, we can detect the interaction between different types of species of the same. So, can we trace how species are getting endangered due to lack of interaction between?
Yeah, there is work on that. I think, in fact, in Umesh Srinivasan's work, they found also that it's not just species, but individuals that associate with each other. And so the loss of individuals and perhaps at a larger level, the loss of species could break down some of those networks. One thing that like all of these, like a lot of the, not the fish studies, but the bird studies have found that gregarious species, the species that already live in groups, are central or called nuclear to flocks. So the loss of these species that actually provide the basis for other species joining them, if those disappear, then flock formation may decline. There is work on that in various parts of the world.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So, Sohail Garu, Chapandi.
If a model can explain a phenomenon,
That's a great question. The question was, if a model can explain a phenomena, does it mean it's correct? Does it mean it does explain? Well, I think yes, but it may not be correct though. In the sense, that may not be what the animals are still doing. I'm not claiming that the animals are doing what the model is saying. No, that's never the claim.
but that's implied from what you showed.
Yeah, because it's a short talk, so. But you know, see, I mean, in fact, yesterday there was a talk by Arshad, who is in our lab, who presented. So there was a very detailed modeling study to explain detailed movement patterns of locusts, saying that all the old models are insufficient. So we have to now account for every neuron in the brain. Then only we can explain the group behavior of the locusts. All that he had to do was modify two rules in the simpler model, add some small complexities. It could explain again everything complex that they required several neurons for every individual to neural basis model was not required. So in a sense, it doesn't mean the neural basis model is wrong. It also doesn't mean it's necessary, right? So likewise, so basically I have two answers to your question. One is that knowing extremely detailed understanding of how individuals and species interact is neither necessary nor sufficient to explain an observed pattern. It's very context dependent.
Which of your two answers is correct?
Yeah.
Recapturing that doesn't necessarily explain.
Okay. Of course. What do you mean by explain?